The Church of Our Fathers by Roland H. Bainton. Taming the Barbarians is chapter 8. And so barbarian apparently means somebody who tries to get along with nature and is open to philosophy and other things that perhaps the New Testament does not support. Philosophy being a method, not, merely quotes. Fresh waves of what they considered to be barbarian invasions brought the Roman Empire to an end in the West, by liberating people. Various people from the north, some Arian Christians, some considered pagans, swept in and set up independent kingdoms in what are now the separate nations of Europe. The Vandals reached northern Africa. The Suevi and the Visigoths were in Spain. Latter, they were in turn overcome by al-Muslimin. The Goths and Franks were in France. Goths and Lombards in Italy. Angles and Saxons in England. Well, a lot of the Roman Empire idea was a myth and, not a fable. Fable, myth has meaning, but yeah, it did have meaning. Some of these names are still used. The name France comes from the Franks. Upper Italy is still called Lombardy, and England is short for Angleland. The invaders were far from killing all the people in the Roman Empire. Sometimes the former owners became servants on what had been their own lands, and sometimes part of the land was taken away from them, and they were allowed to keep the rest. In time, the older and newer peoples intermarried and became one. South of the Rhine River, the language of Rome lived on in somewhat altered form. Spanish, French, and Italian are much like Latin, and English has taken most of its big words from Latin. When all the invasions were over, the map had changed again. Al-Muslimin, as we have seen, held a territory roughly in the shape of their emblem, the crescent. The lands taken by the northern invaders, curiously, had the shape of the Christian emblem, the cross. Yeah, if you're going to be super creative with it, the upper ran from Italy through Scotland, and the arms from the border of Spain up into Germany. Those arms were extended and the crescent was pushed back. The task of teaching these northern peoples in the ways of Rome and the way of Christ fell to the church. Christianity was increasing in Europe, not decreasing, as you had different kingdoms and stuff. The Roman Catholic Church became the successor, in a way, of the Roman Empire, and the popes of Rome carried on much of the power and influence of the emperors. In the great task of winning the West, the popes were immediately helped by the monks. The first monks were so disgusted with what happened to Christianity after the world became Christian that they flung to the desert to get away from the world entirely. But when the world was in grave difficulties, the monks of the West undertook to help making a new world. This they did in two ways. First, by building monasteries in safe places, such as mountaintops and the islands of the sea, where the old Romans could get away from the roughness of those considered to be barbarians, and actually a lot more than that. They wanted to avoid the philosophy and the new ideas and just focus on their Christian stuff too. But secondly, by planting among the so-called barbarians themselves monasteries from which the light of Christianity could shine in the surrounding darkness. Now, the fact that a lot of persecutions and stuff followed, but aside from the issue of persecution, what did I end with last time? I tried to end with, but I didn't quite finish, with a chapter, a short chapter, that points out how people, Christianity, you have different Bibles from the start, different, some words and some sentences. It's not more than just translation issues. 10,000 variants in the Greek so-called New Testament. There's more variations in a single chapter of Genesis than the entire Quran, but you don't have any contradictions or anything other than just linguistic dialects. That's the difference that you see in Quran manuscripts. Seen instead of sod, noon instead of meme, that sort of thing. But only from, only in certain words, But you add all that together, you don't get what you do with a single chapter of Genesis. Any of the chapters, really. But with them all agreeing about the 5 pillars and that they were supposed to follow the inspired teachings of Muhammad and the Quran, that they've broken up to sects anyways. They've got that clear proof. But Christianity never quite had that singularity. So again, the Catholic thing was a pretending. I thought the Ignatius quote about the Catholic Church is pseudo-Ignatius. It doesn't exist until the 4th century, so, saying it predates the historical Catholic Church of 180, that's a different matter. But we shall look at the first great pope of the New West. His name was Gregory I, and let's presume that is Gregory I right there. He is called Gregory the Great. He became pope in 590. Muhammad was like 20, so he wasn't called to be a prophet or anything yet. Shortly after the time of the Emperor Justinian, the gangs of that empire in the West had been lost, and the individuals considered to be barbarians were again in control of much of Italy. The government at Constantinople was unable to handle the intruders, and the government at Rome almost as powerless. And we find that there was actually a reduction in spiritual persecution when all this was going on. But the only one who could do anything was the Pope. And he had the power because he had the money. How the church came to have so much money cannot be traced in detail, while asking everybody to pay a tenth of their income and having the people running the show. So you don't need to trace that one out. That's a lot of money. We do know that people had long been giving lands to the church, and people want to give extra too. The record has come down to us of one farmer who willed his lands and his pigs to the church for the forgiveness of his sins. Well, if you give it during your life, but come on. Yes, you should leave it, to the house of worship if you have no heirs, but anyways, forgiveness of his sins. There must have been many people with many sins, where the church had come to own many pigs, something that Jesus would have said not to eat, and many lands, 1,800 square miles in all, and not to use their flesh and stuff either. And luckily, most of it is in southern Italy, or in the islands, which the so-called barbarians did not hold at that time. From these lands, the church had an income of about $1.5 million a year, in the terms of that day's money, which is, thousands of times of that, right? The Pope had to manage the farming of these lands. Clerks looked after the accounts. Slaves did the manual labor. Well, perhaps even 1 million times that, but the slaves had been given with the land. The church did not free them, but tried to treat them well. The Bible does have teachings in support of the subservient of women and slaves, but that's, again, something that I should go into at a different point. Pope Gregory spent the money, sometimes for the church. Baptismal robes were sent to converted Jews, blankets to the monks of Sinai, and timber for a church in Egypt. Why can't we baptize ourselves? I did this morning. Well, actually, no, the shower isn't a baptism, but close enough. Same principle. And timber for a church in Egypt. The report came back that the logs were too short. Sorry, wrote Gregory, the ship was too short. When a longer one sails, I will send you longer logs. Sometimes the Pope sent gifts to individual poor folk. To one he wrote, I am sending you a duck and a duckling, that whenever you see them, you may think of me. But Gregory also spent his money for the sort of thing that before had been done by the government. The food for the people of Rome had been supplied by the government. Now the Pope owned the grainlands and the ships. Well, you got to feed your slaves at the very least. But inherited slavery, I don't think that is right. Also, when the Romans were captured by those they considered barbarians, the Pope paid the ransom. He was the only one who had enough money. He also made treaties with the barbarian Lombards. In all this, he was acting practically as the ruler of the country. He took to himself these tasks, not because he so wished, but because no one else was able. The church saw a need and stepped in to meet it. The Pope had dealings with the countries round about, and with the Emperor at Constantinople, with the barbarian kingdoms in Spain, France, and England. In all these efforts on behalf of the Church and the people, the Pope was greatly aided by the monks. He had been a monk himself, and would have been glad to spend his days in a monastery. The man who changed monasticism to meet the needs of the new world of the West was Saint Benedict. He lived in Italy when the so-called barbarians were disturbing the country. He provided a place of safety for refugees by building his monastery high on a mountain cliff. This place is called Monte Cassino. Do you pronounce the E? And don't know what's going on. The dude in the tree. I could make up something, but let's wait till we get the official story of the illustration. And is that a flag there? The rule of Saint Benedict became the charter of Western monasticism. Some of the points of the rule were old, as that the monks should be unmarried, poor, and obedient. There was a new rule, that they should stay at home. The hermit monks had sometimes made a nuisance of themselves by wandering like tramps. The monks of Saint Benedict could not leave without special permission. For that reason, the monastery had to provide everything necessary for life: fields and river, a well, a bakery, and a kitchen. The monks had to do all their own work: farming, cutting down trees, cooking, and serving. The day was divided among handiwork, prayer and meditation by oneself, songs and readings together, study, meals, and sleep. The rising bell was at 2 in the morning, but this was not so bad because bed was at 6. Well, it depends on what time of year. I'd say go to sleep at dusk. And if there's not enough sleep after dusk arises before dawn, then, he takes some naps during the day. But the divisions of the day varied with the seasons. Here's a sample. From 2 to 4, prayer. 4 to 4:15, meditation. 4:15 to 6, prayer. 6 to 9, study. 9 to 12, work in the fields. Dinner at noon. The hour of noon used to be 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Noon comes from a Latin word, nona, which means the 9th hour. Well, 3 o'clock would actually be only in daylight savings times would it be the 9th hour. It would be the 10th because 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, see. The monks were required to wait until noon for dinner. They could not change the rule, but they did move up the hour. That is why noon is now at 12 o'clock. The monks ate in perfect silence, while one of their number, who had already eaten, read to them from some good book. If a monk desired anything at the table, he was directed to ask for it by signs, as for example an apple. Put thy thumb in thy fist, and close thy hand, and move afore thee to and fro. For milk, draw thy left little finger in the manner of milking. For mustard, hold thy nose in the upper part of thy right fist, and rub it. For salt, flip with thy thumb. After dinner came naps, then work again in the fields. At sundown, evensong and bed, with the young monks sandwiched between the old to prevent any scuffle. Of course, I think them all sleeping together is probably going to cause some problems, but, and we do find out that did cause a problem, but, okay, anyways, what was I thinking? Yeah, that's all this talk about food's making my stomach. You need to go back and finish your food. The monks had no possessions of their own, but were supplied with beds and blankets, upper and undergarments. Each monk had a knife, a needle, and a stylus for writing. Knives were not to be kept under pillows, lest someone get hurt if there was a tussle. The food would seem plain to us. Not often did they have 24 blackbirds, but of rough fare they had enough. No one starved. The cooking and serving were done by the brothers in turn. At the beginning of the week, the one on kitchen duty prayed that he would make no mistakes, and at the end of the week cleaned up the ones he had made. A special table was served for the guests. The abbot ate with them. He was the father of the monastery. The word abbot comes from the Aramaic word abba, meaning father. The rule says, the abbot must not be worried nor anxious, neither should he be too demanding, or stubborn, or jealous, or suspicious, for then he will never be at rest. The monks were to obey him in everything, but he was to consult them, even to the youngest, and all were to confess to each other their faults. The monasteries were intended partially as retreats from a troubled world, where men might live quietly and win their way to heaven. But they were more than retreats. Visitors might come and receive the best of entertainment. The monks served the world too, in other ways, by their prayers and by their hands. The monasteries, by and by, were built no longer on safe islands or mountaintops, but right in the midst of those they considered to be barbarians, whom the monks taught how to break the land and build roads and bridges. And I figure they actually sort of already knew this stuff, but the church wanted to be in charge of the process. The monks also took children and taught school. See that there? Teaching school and some other tasks. Taught school and copied books. This copying had to be done by hand before the days of printing. The monks gave the most loving care to their work, and made letters with colored inks of exquisite loveliness. The first letter of the page often had a picture inside, which is why that's format is being followed in this book. This is called an illuminated initial. Some of these, in black and white, have been used at the beginnings of the chapters in this book. Okay, I spoke too soon. Here are two of the letter Q, showing the monks occupied in log splitting and harvesting. So, let me... Now, I'm not sure what quite we're going to have, but in terms of the struggle, let's start in terms of the struggle. What should we love more? Hands. 9, Surah 9:24. لَقَدْ نَصَرَكُمُ اللَّهُ فِي مَوَاطِنَ كَثِيرَةٍ Okay, wrong verse, sorry. قُلْ إِنْ كَانَ آبَاؤُكُمْ وَأَبْنَاؤُكُمْ وَإِخْوَانُكُمْ وَأَزْوَاجُكُمْ وَعَشِيرَتُكُمْ وَأَمْوَالٌ اقْتَرَفْتُمُوهَا وتجارة تخشون كسادها ومساكن ترضونها أحب إليكم من الله ورسوله وجهاد في سبيله فتربصوا حتى يأتي الله بأمره والله لا يهدي القوم الفاسقين. Okay, it's quite. But the three types of wealth, well, the means for the wealth, the homes and otherwise, and the 5 closest circles of relationship: parents, children, siblings, spouses, the tribe. These should be less, all these combined, should be less dear to you than the struggle in the cause of God. God and, love of the prophets. Well, the singular is being used here, but for messenger prophets, so we're talking about them all, right? There's other things about, I don't remember at the moment, where the verse, there's talk about, in other places, about not making the lawful forbidden, the forbidden lawful, and changing the conditions and that sort of thing. I kind of remember now, but I'm going to be shorter about this. And there's talk about obeying those in authority over you. But, those who are in a position of authority over you that are obeying God and obeying so they're obeying the revelation and they're obeying the inspired words of God. And, they're the prophets say them in their own words, but so that sort of thing. So the obeying of abbots and that sort of thing should be limited, and they should be fair, as the verses that refer to marriage in particular. Well, what's right and what's fair. So we need to be careful who we allow to be in a position of authority over us.